The Grandson and the Grandfather. Part 1. Some time after the events which you have just related, the Sieur Boulatruelle had a vivid emotion. Boulatruelle, it will perhaps be remembered, was a man occupied with troublous and various things. He broke stones and damaged travellers on the highway. Digger and robber, he had a dream. He believed in treasures buried in the forest of Montfermeil. He hoped one day to find money in the ground at the foot of a tree. In the meantime, he was willing to search for it in the pockets of the passers-by. One morning, a little before the break of day, Boulatruelle, while on the way to his work according to his habit, and upon the watch, perhaps, perceived a man among the branches, whose back only he could see, but whose form, as it seemed to him, through the distance and the twilight, was not altogether unknown to him. Boulatruelle, although a drunkard, had a correct and lucid memory, an indispensable defensive arm to him who is slightly in conflict with legal order. Boulatruelle thought of the treasure. By dint of digging into his memory, he dimly recollected having already had several years before a similar surprise in relation to a man who, it struck him, was very possibly the same man. While he was meditating, he had, under the very weight of his meditation, bowed his head, which was natural, but not very cunning. When he raised it again, there was no longer anything there. The man had vanished in the forest and the twilight. "The deuce!" said Boulatruelle. "I will find him again. I will discover the parish of that parishioner. That Patron-Minette prowler has a why. I will find it out. Nobody has a secret in my woods without I have a finger in it." He took his pickaxe, which was very sharp. "Here is something," he muttered, "to pry into the ground, or a man with." And, as one attaches one thread to another thread, limping along at his best in the path which the man must have followed, he took his way through the thicket. When he had gone 100 yards, daylight, which began to break, aided him. There was nearby a beech tree of great height, worthy of Tityrus and Boulatruelle. Boulatruelle climbed the beech as high as he could. The idea was good. In exploring the solitude on the side where the wood was entirely wild and tangled, Boulatruelle suddenly perceived a man. Hardly had he perceived him when he lost sight of him. The man entered, or rather glided, into a distant glade, masked by tall trees, but which Boulatruelle knew very well, from having noticed there, near a great heap of burstone, a wounded chestnut tree bandaged with a plate of zinc nailed upon the bark. This glade is the one which was formerly called the Blaru ground. Boulatruelle, with the rapidity of joy, let himself fall from the tree rather than descend. The lair was found. The problem was to catch the game. That famous treasure of his dreams was probably there. Boulatruelle threw himself resolutely into the thickest of the bushes. He had to deal with hollies, with nettles, with hawthorns, with sweetbriars, with thistles, with exceedingly irascible brambles. He was very much scratched. At the bottom of a ravine, he found a stream which must be crossed. He finally reached the Blaru glade at the end of 40 minutes, sweating, soaked, breathless, torn, ferocious. Nobody in the glade. Boulatruelle ran to the heap of stones. It was in its place. Nobody had carried it away. As for the man, he had vanished into the forest. He had escaped. Where? On which side? In what thicket? Impossible to guess. And a bitter thing. There was behind the heap of stones, before the tree with the plate of zinc, some fresh earth, a pick, forgotten or abandoned, and a hole. This hole was empty. "Robber!" cried Boulatruelle, showing both fists to the horizon. Part 2. Marius was for a long time neither dead nor alive. He had for several weeks a fever, accompanied with delirium, and serious cerebral symptoms, resulting rather from the concussion produced by the wounds in the head than from the wounds themselves. As long as there was danger, Monsieur Gillenormand, in despair at the bedside of his grandson, was, like Marius, neither dead nor alive. Every day, and sometimes twice a day, a very well-dressed gentleman with white hair, such was the description given by the porter, came to inquire after the wounded man, and left a large package of lint for the dressings. At last, on the 7th of September, 3 months to a day after the sorrowful night when they had brought him home dying to his grandfather, the physician declared him out of danger. Convalescence began. At each new phase of improvement, which continued to grow more and more visible, the grandfather raved. He did 1,000 mirthful things mechanically. He ran up and down the stairs without knowing why. A neighbour, a pretty woman withal, was amazed at receiving a large bouquet one morning. It was Monsieur Gillenormand who sent it to her. The husband made a scene. Monsieur Gillenormand attempted to take Nicolette upon his knees. He called Marius Monsieur the Baron. He cried Vive la République. As for Marius, while he let them dress his wounds and care for him, he had one fixed idea: Cosette. To him the idea of life was not distinct from the idea of Cosette. He had decreed in his heart that he would not accept the one without the other, and he was unalterably determined to demand from anybody, no matter whom, who should wish to compel him to live, from his grandfather, from fate, from hell, from the restitution of his vanished Eden. He did not hide the obstacles from himself. Monsieur Gillenormand, without manifesting it in any way, noticed that Marius, since he had been brought home and restored to consciousness, had not once said to him father. He did not say monsieur, it is true, but he found means to say neither the one nor the other by a certain manner of turning his sentences. A crisis was evidently approaching. As it almost always happens in similar cases, Marius, in order to try himself, skirmished before offering battle. This is called feeling the ground. One morning, it happened that Monsieur Gillenormand, over a newspaper which had fallen into his hands, spoke lightly of the Convention, and discharged a royalist epithet upon Danton, Saint-Just, and Robespierre. "The men of '93 were giants," said Marius sternly. The old man was silent, and did not whisper for the rest of the day. Part 3. One day, Monsieur Gillenormand, while his daughter was putting in order the vials and the cups upon the marble tap of the bureau, bent over Marius and said to him in his most tender tone, "Do you see, my darling Marius? In your place I would eat meat now rather than fish. A fried sole is excellent to begin a convalescence, but to put the sick man on his legs it takes a good cutlet." Marius, nearly all whose strength had returned, gathered it together, sat up in bed, rested his clenched hands on the sheets, looked his grandfather in the face, assumed a terrible air, and said, "This leads me to say something to you." "And what is it?" "It is that I wish to marry." "Foreseen," said the grandfather, and he burst out laughing. "How, foreseen?" "Yes, foreseen. You shall have her, your lassie." Marius, astounded, and overwhelmed by the dazzling burst of happiness, trembled in every limb. Monsieur Gillenormand continued, "Yes, you shall have her, your handsome, pretty little girl. She comes every day in the shape of an old gentleman to inquire after you. Since you were wounded, she has passed her time in weeping and making lint. I have made inquiry. She lives in the Rue de l'Homme Armé, number 7. Ah, we are ready. Ah, you want her? Well, you shall have her. That catches you, ah? You thought the old fellow was going to storm, make a gruff voice? No, to cry no, and to lift his cane upon all this dawn. Not at all. Cosette? So be it. Love? So be it. I ask nothing better. Monsieur, take the trouble to marry. Be happy, my dear child." Thus said, the old man burst into sobs, and he took Marius' head, and he hugged it in both arms against his old breast, and they both began to weep. That is one of the forms of the most supreme happiness. "Father!" exclaimed Marius. "Ah, you love me, then?" said the old man. There was an ineffable moment. They choked and did not speak. At last the old man stammered, "Come, the ice is broken. He has called me father." Marius released his head from his grandfather's arms and said softly, "But, father, now that I am well, it seems to me that I could see her." "Foreseen again. You shall see her tomorrow." "Father!" "What?" "Why not today?" "Well, today. Here goes for today. You have called me father 3 times. It is well worth that. I will see to it. She shall be brought to you, foreseen, I tell you. This has already been put into verse. It is the conclusion of André Chénier's elegy of the Jeune Malade. André Chénier, who was murdered by the scoundrel." by the giants of 93.